Good morning, Seal Beach. It was such a long drive from Namaste. We kind of look at Seal Beach as our cousin. So I've had many conversations over the time of being involved in this movement with communities throughout Southern California, and Seal Beach has been one of those communities. Marjorie, Ray, and I have been friends for many years. We went to we had practitioner together at Huntington Beach, and we've had our own journey, haven't we, Marjorie, through different communities. I want to congratulate you on a deep and meaningful transition. It may not feel that way. It probably doesn't. So let's begin and talk a little bit about what I'm going to call, and I'm sure some of you have heard of, is what is called liminal space. I'm going to begin with a little bit about myself. I grew up in a remote mining town 60 miles east of Indio, California. And so it sits between Blythe and Indio, and if you're wondering what's there, there's nothing. And after I left, that very little nothing became even more nothing, because now it's a ghost town. So the nearest community was Indio, California, and that's where I was born, because that was the nearest hospital, the nearest community that had really any services that we could use. I grew up in a town of roughnecks. Eagle Mountain, there were 3 types of employments. There was an iron ore mine, there was some services, and a little bit of retail, and when I say some, I could put them on one hand. Or there was education, which was the K through 12 schools. And there was a school for elementary, a school for middle school, and a school for high school. And I actually graduated in a class of 39 people. Seems weird in California because you don't really think there are towns this size, and there are towns even smaller than that. My father, grandfather, and great-grandfather worked in the mine. My father was a mechanic, my grandfather was an electrician, and my great-grandfather was this heavy equipment operator, and he drove the largest earth-moving vehicles on the planet. The work was hard, it was long, and the conditions were quite severe. There was the heat, the cold, the wind, the extreme terrain of being in the middle of the Mojave Desert. And it was hard for everyone. Sometimes we didn't know that because we were so used to it. My parents were married at an incredibly early age, and they had family around, but I came to understand later that they didn't feel really that they knew how to parent children at such a very young age. And based on their own experience of having been parented, they felt even a little bit more in the dark. Not like most parents sometimes, I think. My dad, who worked in the mine, he ended up meeting this really amazing man who sort of mentored my father. My father was 21 when he came to work in the mine. This man was a bit older than him. And my dad was struck by the contentment in this man and a sense that he had, he knew himself, and my father did not. He did not grow up with anyone around him that had that sense either. As it would happen, this mentor that he had was Mormon. And so my father, in hanging out with him for about a year, ended up joining the Mormon faith. I was 7 at the time. So it was really the first faith that I had any understanding or knowledge of. And so I had a great interest in spirituality anyway. I would sit at the foot of my grandmother, who would tell me stories of varying characters in the Bible. She was a Baptist, to which my mother ended up joining the Mormon church. She went from being Southern Baptist to Mormon. I don't even know how that happens. They don't even like each other. So from an early age, I had this great interest and desire to study and to sort of go deep into what I thought and what was God. How did God operate in life? And how was I to operate in life? So the challenge was, though, is that I happened to see the experience of God see God in the experience of my parents. My mother struggled deeply with mental illness. She was bipolar, borderline, and OCD. It's like the great trifecta. So my experience of her is watching her struggle, along with my parents kind of battling through life with that, as well as living in harsh conditions, living in a community that was a struggle anyway. I remember at nights under the desert sky looking up, and it was always clear, never rained in the desert, maybe once or twice a year it felt like. And I would look up and see these stars, and at times the moon, and I would have these conversations at a very young age about who I am and what am I in this universe. And I didn't always have the language for it, but my spirituality, the faith of my growing up, helped me in a lot of ways, in ways that I truly appreciated. But there was one question that I couldn't seem to get an answer for, and that was, how can I be better? And I asked that question at an early age. I wanted, in my faith, at least the faith growing up, there was this desire and ultimate goal of being perfect. And that idea of perfection continued to present me with a question that could not be reconciled. In fact, in the context of my faith, it could not be reconciled. But I continued to embrace this faith, and I moved deeper into its spiritual practices and the beliefs that it had. In fact, as I grew older, I got into the teenage years, which are always a challenge. We have a teenager, so we know what that feels like a little bit. And the desire to become perfect was also in conflict with the fact that as you're in high school and you're moving through that experience of high school, to be perfect was also in conflict, sort of which the day of being, that day in the 80s of a teenager, and wanting to be accepted and loved and mattered. In my own household, I didn't necessarily feel that way because of the struggle that my parents were going through. They were deep into their own challenges, and so to even have an idea of what their kids might have been going through wasn't necessarily one that they could see. So one of the things that helped me was I ended up in my teenage years before high school, I would go to what was called seminary. So every morning before class, I would go to seminary at 6:30 in the morning, and I was diligent and I was committed, which was kind of unusual for a teenager, I think. But I loved it. I loved the study of the sacred text in which we studied. I loved everything about it. And there were things that started to get presented to me that continued to be in conflict with what I felt about myself. Some of those things, for example, I was dealing with this idea of polygamy that the Mormon Church was talking about. And it wasn't something that was practiced or has been practiced for years, but I really struggled with it. And so it presented with me mostly about what and who am I as a woman in this faith. I have nothing against the Mormon Church, let me clarify that, because it really truly gave me a great base. But the questions that were coming up had no answers, and some questions never have answers. But at the same time, I would go and ask, what does this mean? And the leaders of that faith would give me an answer that just didn't match what it felt like inside. So I had to sort of travel that experience over the next years into my young adult years to where certain questions could not be answered, but certain answers were completely in contradiction to what I believed, which is who I am. I realized at some point that this idea that I could be perfect was really to fit within a box of an expectation that could never be met. As human beings, we come into this planet as finite. In the vehicle is finite. Who we are inside, the truth of who we are inside is infinite. But to have this experience on this planet, which is interesting, I saw in your mission statement, the abundance of life. The abundance of life also includes the fullness of life, which includes challenges, which includes lessons, which includes the facing of beliefs that don't serve us. And so in that experience, the fullness of life can be challenging and troubling, and we suffer through life at times. We don't understand. We seek. And the ultimate goal, at least with Science of Mind, is that we come into oneness with all that there is, knowing that who we are right now, right here and right now, is enough. And it's that revelation of the truth of who we are in which we come into what we call the God qualities, peace and love, abundance. For those are the things that we are. We're abundant in the diversity of the individualized expression of everyone that walks this planet. And it feels like even as a minister, some of the things that I walk through with people, myself including, is that somehow my expression is not as good as someone else's, or that somehow my expression is not enough. Or that somehow when I make mistakes, that I'm doing something wrong. Now, as I walked through the experience of being a young adult and being Mormon, what ended up happening is I had been coming to a point that I would call a liminal space. And a liminal space, according to Richard Rohr, is, I love his description of it, so let me read it for you. Liminality is the form of holding the tension between one space and another. It is in these transitional moments of our lives that authentic transformation can happen. Some would call it voluntary, or I should say involuntary, displacement. We wake up this way and find ourselves on the threshold of something new, and we are shocked into realizing that our usual state is not the only option, and there might be something more. If you could go ahead and put up the slide of the hero's journey, part of this experience that we have is we're going to face challenges over and over and over again in life because life shifts. We are never going to stay the same. As I moved into my 20s, what ended up happening is I started to challenge my faith, and I ended up being excommunicated from the Mormon Church. That's the short story. That shift from having sort of this ground on which I thought I was standing that would not change was not true. The ground changes. The ground on which we stand changes, and it must change. And it must change for us to grow. The truth of it is, the only way we change often is when something shows up to knock us off that solid ground. Once I was excommunicated, it gave me the license, not necessarily in joy, to pursue and look at who am I on this planet? What is my purpose? What is the how of what I want to be? The hero's journey happens at the individual level. It also happens, believe it or not, at the global, the community level as well. We will never walk a path where change does not happen. We won't. And as much as we'd like to hold on to things, wow, it's working out really well and I really like the way things are going, and then all of a sudden, something happens. And we think, oftentimes, who's to blame? We always want that. I didn't do it. I had nothing to do with this one, right? Who's to blame? What's to blame? What did we do wrong? What happened that... Why did this happen to me? Why did this happen to us? I don't know. And I don't know that there's an answer to that. I don't know there needs to be. But what we know is when we look at patterns in our own lives, we can look at the community pattern, the global pattern. I mean, really, right now, have you ever seen such a global liminality? I mean, serious. I haven't experienced what I've experienced in the last 2 years since I was excommunicated from the church. Not to this extent. At least I have felt that way. I never signed up to be a minister in this kind of community. I didn't go to school saying, great, bring on a pandemic and let me walk through that. But I also didn't think about this too. About 4 years ago, I was invited to have coffee with a group of amazing folks. And they wanted to have a conversation with me. And I sat down with them, and I heard similar story to what I even heard just in the last 2 weeks here. I'm not saying the same, just similar to where there's a huge transition. Something happens, someone leaves, something shifts, and it's so big that everybody gets thrown, right? So 4 years ago in that coffee, a small group of people asked me if I would help them walk through a transition where their previous senior minister, spiritual leader, had left. And it was abrupt. I thought, wow, is this what I'm supposed to do? First of all, I'm going to just throw it out there. I'm not the folks that Home Office would call and invite in to be the interim minister. I had a really deep and rich corporate background. I had a lot of experience in leading in spiritual communities, but I had not been a minister of a community and leading through a transition. But there was something that they saw. They said, could you help us? And as we sat there with coffee, and I even said to them, well, how much are you going to pay me? And they said, well, how about coffee? And by the way, they didn't buy me coffee that day. I'd already bought mine. So, in some ways, I paid them so I could have that conversation. Some of the things they experienced in that transition was an accumulated level of debt that was overwhelming. And it was much greater than a community the size of most centers could really sustain and manage. The building that they had moved into had some challenges, both growing cost for rent and maintenance, and there were city code restrictions on renting half of the entire building. Attendance was dropping on Sundays, and most Sundays were conversations about how much money we need. And the community felt defeated and confused, and education and other offerings had been reduced significantly. And the question was, how did we get here? It doesn't matter what the circumstances or facts are. How did we get here? And what we came to understand is that's not really sort of the question we can always answer, because it's never immediate. There's always things happening universally. If we're at the 35,000 foot level, we can see things kind of moving and operating. We may not still be able to tell at the individual level what might happen. But we know that things are moving and transitioning all the time. Ernest Holmes said, though, and this is where we came back to what is it we're here to do? And he said, and this is an essential Ernest, it says, we are a teaching order, not a preaching order. We are a practicing order, not a proselytizing order. So the point of the matter, let's get back to some basics and let's start practicing. And let's see what this unfolds to. Because if we truly believe in the principles that we talk about and we practice, then this is no different situation. Ernest says turn away from the conditions, not necessarily ignore them or avoid them, but turn away our perception of those conditions so that we can step into that this is a necessary part of being human. We had to make some tough decisions and unpack a bit in the community. And I must say that the community of Namaste did an absolutely fantastic job. They were ready to step in, and there were tough questions, and there were hard conversations. There were lessons to be learned in the practitioner core, the board, and the community at large. We identified lessons learned. We approached absolutely everything from spiritual principle. Otherwise, why do this? We cannot say, well, it works here, but it doesn't work here. It works everywhere. It doesn't work. When I came in and started to work with them, one of the things that we discussed at the board levels, we held listening sessions with the community so that they could speak their story, so that they had that safe place to speak out what they were afraid of, to speak out about what they were angry about, to speak out what they were confused about. Remember, until the story gets out, we don't really, and we cannot heal it. We have to actually sometimes tell the story. I mean, in truth, it doesn't matter what happened, but sometimes as humans, we have to get the story out. And also there were rumors and a host of things just going through the community. And it was important for us to hear it all, not to defend it, not to defend who we were as a community, but in essence, to just walk through it and not walk around it. We released financial documents. We held those financial documents out for everyone and listened to what people felt about them. We stopped asking for money. We reduced our expenses down. We looked everywhere. We looked at ways in which we could manage in a way that was necessarily what I would call right-sizing it, to right-size the budget so that we could manage it according to our size and manage it in a way that would sustain us and give us that ability to be nimble and flexible, ultimately, so that we could at some point rest in what are we here to do? Not that I'm here to manage a building, not that I'm here to manage a budget, although that's what we do. But we're here as a divine community, so that in that divine community, what am I here to do? We did a co-creative process, at least the community did, to determine who their minister was going to be. I walked over here and did my own process, because one of the things I did is I loved Namaste. I had visited it over the years. I was looking for a pulpit to land, and when I took the position, I said, I don't know if I want to be your minister. This was unusual. I worked with Home Office. But I'd like the option to decide. And if you're open to that, if you choose or not choose, or if I choose or not, we both walk away, no harm, no foul. We agreed. I went over here and did my work and came up with a covenant with myself of the kind of minister that I wanted to be. And the community was over here doing its co-creative process. And then every Sunday they would read the results of that co-creative process as an intention and as a belief. And this is what we're creating. And when I looked up for the first time and saw it, there were 3 words that they used in that intention, and those 3 words were wisdom, power, and freedom. Strangely, when I was over here on my own, the same 3 words came up. I didn't tell anyone until much later because I didn't want to influence the community, and I didn't necessarily want to affect the outcome in a way that might appear to be manipulative too. We became equals and partners as we walked through this journey. Eventually, I decided I would candidate, and to which I did. And when I did candidate with the community, one of the things that I asked, which is totally not like me, is I said that Sunday, choose me. Choose me. And that was the most vulnerable place to stand. But the community had been so beautifully vulnerable that how could you not? See, for what happens at the individual level happens at the collective level, happens at the global level, and we can all be that. And if we recognize that when I say my consciousness, there really is no such thing. It's our consciousness. I have an individualized perception of it, but it's really part of it all. If you could put up the next slide for me, my friend. Mark Nepo said, imagine that each of us is a spoke in an infinite wheel, and though each spoke is essential to keeping the wheel whole. No 2 spokes are the same. The rim of that wheel is our living sense of community and family and relationship. But the common hub where all the spokes join is the one center where all souls meet. So as I move out into the world, I live out my uniqueness. But when I dare look into my core, I come upon the one common center where all lives begin. In that center, we are one and the same. I am one with this fly right here and right now. For mysteriously and powerfully, when I look deep enough into you, I find me. And when you dare to hear my fear in the recess of your heart, you recognize it is your secret that you thought no one else knew. And that unexpected wholeness that is more than each of us, but common to all, the moment of unity is the atom of God. As you walk through a transition the transition is another opportunity of this size to come together as one. It is the invitation of unity. That invitation is always present. It is never not there. But sometimes it's like remembering. It's a reminder. It's not that anything or anyone was doing anything untoward. It's not that anyone or anything made a mistake, for there are no mistakes in the mind of God. The question is, can I step into opening to a true belief in that? Because if that's the case, then what does that mean on the national level? If that's the case, what does it mean at the universal level? Whatever we experience at the one is the same experience of the whole. What does it mean to come together as community, to have that oneness where we, as you embark, and then I invite you into that co-creative process of selecting whoever is your next leader, you're not picking someone who's going to solve anything or fix anything. As a minister, we are all equal. As practitioners, we're all equal. As community members, we're all equal. We all have a place in the unfolding of our community. We all have a part in it. We have a part in it. I love seeing Ryan here, my old friend Ryan. And Ryan said he hadn't been here in a while. He has a part in it. And stepping into your space today, I'm grateful to see that because he felt the pull. Thank you for answering that call. Stepping into community right now is the most powerful thing you can do. To hang in there when there looks like, and you don't know what's going to happen. You don't know if it's going to be what you want it to be. Well, if it's not what I want it to be, then I'm not going to do it. We can't do that in community because that's not why we're here. We're here, we come together in like-mindedness. We come here because of the spiritual principles that we practice, and we come here to have an experience of each other. And at Namaste, one of the things we say often, all the time, is the face of God. When I see the face of God in you, I see it in me. When I see it in me, I see it in you. And if I can't see it in you, then I can't see the face of God. So it is up to me to remember who I am, to remember who you are, no matter how anyone shows up. Course in Miracles, anything unlike love, if you want to learn about love, anything unlike love shows up. Well, if I want love to be here, if I want peace to be here, if I want whatever it is I want to be here, I have to show up with it, as it, and remember that I'm part of that beautiful net of precious jewels. There's no change, there's no power for change greater than a community discovering what it cares about. Margaret Wheatley. At a conference, there were 200 people attending a seminar on mental and physical health. At one point, the speaker told the group they were going to do an activity. He gave each attendee one balloon and told them to write their name on it. Then the balloons were collected and moved into a very tiny room. The participants were then asked to go into the other room and were given 2 minutes to go find their balloon in that tiny room. It was absolute chaos. People were searching frantically for the balloon, pushing each other and running into one another while they grabbed a balloon, looked at it, and inevitably tossed it to the side because it wasn't their balloon. You can see it, right? Within minutes, at the end of 2 minutes, no one had found their balloon that had their name on it. Then the speaker asked the participants to go back in the room. Now listen. And pick up one balloon at random, look at the name, and return it to the owner. Within minutes, everyone had been reunited with their original balloon. The speaker then told the group, this is what's like when people are frantically searching for just their own way of life, their own happiness, their own joy, and it's just mine. But look what happens when we push aside just to get the things we want. And our interest is in the happiness of the whole, the greater of the whole. Ernest Holmes said, find me someone who has given all that he has in love without morbidity, excessive gloom, and I will have found the lover of my soul. Why? Because he will have revealed to me the nature of God and proved to me the possibility of all souls. Sometimes in this movement, there's a tendency to believe that we're here on this individual journey, which we are. Just look around in the room for a moment. You're traveling with each other. You're not here just to do your own thing. If I focus on only my spiritual evolution, my development, my comfort, my love, I'm missing the point, because it's not enough that I do it just for me. I'm doing it for the whole. I'm here to serve for the whole. I'm here to shed what is in the way of seeing that I'm home here. This is my home. This is my home. The community that is Seal Beach Center for Spiritual Living is your home. Take care of it like it's your home. Give it the love and the attention as you walk through this transition. Practice it. See it in others. See it for yourself. Because ultimately, what we do in spiritual community, the divine community, is we love each other home. We love each other home. The energy that exists between people when they feel seen, heard, and valued, when they can give and receive without judgment, and when they derive sustenance and strength from the relationship, is community. Brené Brown. I'm really grateful to be with you here today. Our community holds you in prayer for the highest and best, knowing that who you are collectively is who we are. We are all the same, one and the same, with purpose and desire and a tug, which is all going to the same place. And so I honor you on this journey, and I'm grateful that I get to share it with you. And the community of Namaste wishes you well and love and peace. So would you go into prayer with me? So in recognition that there is this one power and presence that is God, I gratefully surrender to this recognition, knowing that it is all there is, and there is nothing but it. It is, again, that love and that abundance, and all that has been spoken today, for every word is a prayer, knowing that it's all God. I know that I'm one with it, and everyone in this community is as well. I just bless the board of this community as they've stepped into the holder of space, of transition. For each community member who is here with that beautiful desire and love for this community that has been here for so long. The practitioners, every person that steps up here and speaks from that place of love, we bless them right here and right now. Knowing that all is good in the mind of God, there's nothing to worry about. For everything unfolds as it should. It is not the destination, but the journey to which love unfolds. And all is well. So in gratitude for all that is unfolding, knowing that each one of us support each other on that journey, I'm grateful. So I just release this prayer into the law, knowing it is good and very good. And so it is. Thank you, Seal Beach.